Wayne, it looks like everyone's getting in okay tonight.
It seems that way. Did you change your location, Rob?
I'm still using Tony's login so that we can.
And so that's why it says town hall.
Yeah, just that's just how he has it set up.
Gotcha. All right, just need the rest of our community to show up here. We'll be good.
I think we have Marie here. She's muted.
Hello, how are you?
Okay. Okay, so where's our missing bodies?
Guys, this is Steve. I'm on a landline, unfortunately, but I am here.
Okay. All right, so that's 4 of us in here, right? Am I accurate?
I haven't seen John, so yep.
Okay, so let's call this meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. Okay, so first topic would be minutes of the previous meeting.
Actually, Wayne, could we?
What do you want to do?
Could we go to the review and discussion of the technical problems first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Guys, do you want to take a roll before? I don't know if that's customary, but if we take a roll call for attendance.
Well, we know who's here.
I'll put it up. Yeah, that gets written into the minutes as far as who's in attendance. So let me go over what happened in the Zoom meeting on March 8th with regard to the inability of some people to get into the meeting. I will take the full blame for that. At some point when the meeting was set up, I must have turned on the waiting room feature, which I had not used before. And fortunately, we got through the first 2 meetings without an issue. Somehow or other, it did get turned on. And I was able to deal with that for the first few minutes. I was busily trying to turn that feature off and thought that I had it turned off, but obviously I did not. The problem from my standpoint was that I was sharing my screen. We had an Excel spreadsheet on display, and I had one other document that I had brought forward on my monitor to look at for myself, and it overlapped the control panel on Zoom. So when other people went into the waiting room, I couldn't see the flag saying they were there. And all I can do is apologize for that. It's a lesson learned. And I made sure tonight that that feature was turned off so everybody can come and go as they please.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any questions relative to that issue? No
Okay,
question?
Wayne, so there's
Okay, so
been
it
the
should resolve.
suggestion. There's been the suggestion that we vote to ratify, validate, and confirm what occurred in the last meeting as far as the discussion that we had with that
Okay.
spreadsheet document.
Well, isn't that what our minutes is going to do?
I'm sorry?
Isn't that what our current minutes will do?
Yeah, well, we're gonna discuss that in our current minutes. Yeah, we'll bring that in. But it's just I don't know if maybe we should read the outline and then vote on that, or if just to make sure that it's all clean cut.
Yeah, if you prefer, it's okay with me.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
So as a follow-up from our March 8th meeting, which included the discussion of matters raised during that meeting, it's been recommended that we vote to ratify, validate, and confirm the substance of those discussions that we had on March 8th. So in that regard, I just want to read the outline here, all of which is included in the minutes, that as far as what that meeting entailed or included. The only vote that we took, I think, was to approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
That's correct.
So, yeah, so it's all built around the discussion that we had, the topic of which was to, as far as the March 8th agenda, was to continue the discussion regarding development of short-term rental guidelines. The action taken was discussion only. The documents used included a list of themes and issues prepared by Marie Hladikova and an STR worksheet working draft prepared by Art Thibault, both offered as potential resources to assist the committee. Recommendations that occurred during that review of the working draft included add definition for non-owner occupied dwelling to row 10 inside that draft. Remove the language in row 11 because it didn't apply to the town of Nahant. We're working off of a list of an outline of a program established in Cambridge. So in this case, the item in row 11 was removed entirely. In row 14, we would be held open for further consideration of non-owner occupied. Row 16 considered changing this to read 105 CMR 410. Row 24 changed 10 consecutive hours to 24 consecutive hours. Row 33, more information is needed and I contacted the city of Cambridge to identify, I was assigned to contact the city of Cambridge to identify what information is collected through their program. And then there was row 35, more information was needed with respect to who would be the Commissioner of Inspectional Services in Nahant. And let's see. There is the document that we were reading from, and this document is on file and available for anyone to view. We can see in the right-hand column, these comments are what we suggested we would do during that meeting. On the left-hand side is basically the text is taken right from the city of Cambridge. So at this time, Wayne, I recommend that we vote to ratify, validate, and confirm in substance the short-term rental committee's discussions.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to that effect. Anyone gonna jump on that?
I'll second.
All right, we have, well, I
Oh.
technically, I guess I can't make the motion. So Marie, are you making the motion?
Yes, I would like to make the motion.
Okay. Someone want to second it?
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor? We're gonna do a roll call. So, Maria,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
Steve,
I wasn't there, Wayne, so, I mean, I don't know
Well-
if I would abstain or I would vote no.
I wouldn't, well, you can't vote no if you did, if you.
Uh,
Like I said, all we did was review what we discussed in the previous meeting.
If unsure, abstain is fine too.
If you don't feel you're qualified to vote on it, then I'm gonna vote aye, and then that's the motion passes.
Perfect.
Hi, this is Tony. I'm on by cell phone. Just wanted to let you know if you need me for anything, I'll put
Okay.
myself on mute.
Tony? Okay, so now that we've done that, well, I guess we're duplicating the effort, but let's do the actual minutes of the previous meeting. Yes. All the committee members read the minutes of the previous meeting?
I did.
I've
Steve?
got it.
I did.
Okay, so does anyone want to make a motion to accept the minutes?
Motion to accept the minutes.
Someone want to second that, please?
Seconded by Art Thibault.
Okay, all those in favor? Let's go around again. Maria,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
Steve?
I'll abstain again, Wayne, for not being there.
Okay, and I'll vote aye. Motion is made and passed to accept the minutes of the previous meeting. So let's move on to the next agenda item, which is continued discussion. Rob, can we,
Yep.
you want to go right back to that spreadsheet piece that you had and continue where we left off?
I'll do
relative
that.
to-
I'm writing furiously here. Let me get over that.
No, don't hurry on my account. Take all the time you need.
Okay, so what were your thoughts, Wayne? I mean, we could or just open it up, Steve, to Steve maybe, as far as if he has any comments as far as what we've got here.
It's fine.
thanks, Rob. Sorry, Wayne. Yeah, I read through
Go
it.
ahead.
Seems to be a good starting point. I think we, wasn't at the meeting obviously last week, a couple weeks ago, but I think we got to start somewhere. So, we can do that. We can add stuff or delete stuff as we progress, and nothing really jumps out at me.
All right, so let's, I think we should move to the line item where we left off and kind of continue that process so we can get down through this, get into some of the nitty gritty of it, and then we'll work back and we'll work from there.
Okay. So let me just throw in one other thing here that this item here, the owner, operator of an owner, I'm sorry. Yeah, accurate books and records, make them available upon request. I know that we talked a little bit about what would be included in that. I sent an email to Cambridge. It's a different noise.
Okay, go ahead, keep going.
So Cambridge only does this for owner adjacent short-term rentals where they require this information. Let's see. I talked with a gentleman, James D'Angelo. He's a compliance inspector with Cambridge. He says, again, only owner adjacent short-term rentals are required to keep accurate books and records, and they should be maintained for 3 years. Basically, other than that, he also mentioned that your hosting platform will also be capturing some of this, which I think is how there's actually a state Code of Massachusetts Regulation 830 62C.25.1 also speaks to the need to capture information.
Right.
And in that, they're saying you must have the name and address of the guest and automobile registration number, if applicable, and details of all charges. And that's as far as the state goes. And that's for everything. And I suspect that's probably being managed by the host platform.
That's more than likely. Did this gentleman explain why they were requiring this only for owner adjacent as opposed to owner occupied?
He didn't. No, actually, I didn't ask him the question.
Curious.
Yep.
Just that you are aware, I checked on Airbnb, and as a host, you can actually do a data pool of all reservations for a period of time. So Airbnb does keep this information, and owners have an ability to do data pool from the system.
Okay.
I don't know if they do keep license plate numbers though, because, people may rent a vehicle and that I haven't seen included.
Really, right. I mean, if someone's flying to a different location, they're not driving there. So a license plate number, what's going to do anybody any good? All right. Well, at least it's more information than we had last week. So let's kind of pull that in, and then let's keep moving down the list. Is this where we left off, Rob?
This is pretty much where we left off. Was we got through the registration, and then we were at the 7 o'clock mark. So at that point, I think we were looking for everyone to throw in their thoughts on other things that maybe they might see on other communities that were interesting or whatever. And I've actually got a little bit of that summarized here too, as far as additional potential draft items.
Go ahead.
Okay, so looking at that piece that Steve sent over, the Rockport, and they've got an odd situation down there as far as why they even decided they wanted to regulate.
Go ahead.
It apparently, based on the document that I read, it sounds like the short-term rentals were falling in conflict with the families that had been renting their properties during the summer in Rockport for years and had an established customer base and such, and suddenly found themselves in competition. So the selectmen apparently put this together and or their document together, and we're trying to come up with a way of bringing some parity to everybody that was in the business of short-term rentals. But a couple of things that jumped out at me. The first one here being number of short-term rentals for non-owner occupied Each non-owner occupied short-term rental shall be for a minimum of at least 7 consecutive nights, which, let's see, saying the guest may stay for less than the minimum stay, provided that such SDR properties remain vacant until the end of the minimum stay period. So basically, they're saying you can have one renter per week, no matter how many days they stay.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't see where that really changes anything. Well, I mean, I understand they probably have some reason for what they did there, but I mean, I can't imagine how that kind of relates to the town of Nahant. Because Rockport probably does have a lot of seasonal rental stuff, kind of like down the Cape, right? You know, they've been renting houses for a week at a time down the Cape for centuries.
Absolutely. Now,
So-
I want to believe that it's linked to the concerns that we're seeing in various communities with respect to non-owner occupied short-term rentals. There's a whole host of things, and obviously this was targeted right at them.
Right. Well, I mean, it's worth considering, but
Yeah.
my own opinion is I don't think it really does much for anybody.
No, I actually think that
Other than limiting the number of rentals, because if you can only rent it once a week, then you're limiting the rental, the total number of rentals for a season. You're just going about it in a different way. You're not actually putting a number on it. You're just saying you can only rent it once a week.
yeah, and I would think it would be an enforcement nightmare to try and figure out who was there for.
Yeah, I can't imagine how they're enforcing that.
Yeah.
Right.
Another thought as far as booking limits in Salem, hosted rental, there is no maximum limit on the number of days within a calendar year. An accessory short-term rental may be rented when the resident family is present as a host. Multiple bookings at any given time by more than one group of guests are allowed. Non-hosted rentals, the total number of days within a calendar year an accessory short-term rental may be rented without the resident family being present as a host shall not exceed a maximum of 95 days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not sure what problem is this trying to solve in Salem. I mean, why 95 days?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of seems like an arbitrary figure.
Well, it to me, it's again, the effort to try and limit the amount of non-hosted rentals.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
which-
but
Rob,
sure.
the problem with non-hosted rentals that towns are trying to solve. I mean, you know, if noise is the issue, you can have noise 95 days a year as opposed to like 360. I mean, I'd probably be worth checking if that's something we want to consider, but I don't understand what the problem is.
Well, the other piece that they may be trying to approach here is maintaining a neighborhood feeling as far as how the property is being used. This is supposed to be a residential area, and many consider a non-hosted rental to be entirely commercial. So, you know, when and you know, we've seen it as far as recent court cases, as far as the court's interest in making sure that a residential zoned area is kept residential in all respects. So it could be their way to compromise here as far as saying, all right, well, you can have some non-hosted, but you can't do it all the time because that's a hotel.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
Salem has some hotels and B&Bs, so they, you know, that may be another way, another reason.
And one of the big issues that I just in reading, again, back to say Cambridge and Newton, a lot of those towns have hotels, and the hotels, you know, I'm not quite certain what they pay, but I'm sure they're not just paying property tax on there. They're paying for licenses and all that. Therefore, they're going to try to protect the hotels to the best of their capabilities. Nahant, of course, doesn't have any, but bigger question would be what I felt from the start we should, you know, maybe this can add into this list we're going to work off of. What are the actual issues now? and where do they take place? You know, a lot of this has been, of course, speculation as part of planning, but, you know, we're speculating a lot that certain things happen here and not there. And, you know, as you just said, a residential feel to a neighborhood. I'm thinking, I asked Tony if there was a way to get our hands on whatever the complaints were, whatever the issues were, or if anybody on the board knows personally. I think that would be good. And then we could try to build rules around it. That way we're not just kind of arbitrarily building rules to fix problems that either don't exist or that we're maybe forecasting, but maybe wrong.
Well, I can understand that viewpoint. I can tell you that I had someone in my office just yesterday complaining about an Airbnb or short, I'll come and say short-term rental because I don't know if it was an Airbnb rental, but a short-term rental on a house that is not owner occupied. It seems to be moving into a full-time rental situation with an owner that's actually out of the state. And I'm gonna assume that it hasn't been going on for a long time, but the neighborhood's already raising a ruckus.
And
So
so what were the issues? So when somebody talked to you about it, what specifically were the problem?
you know, well, one of the specific issues was an automobile speeding up the street and ended up at that property. So whoever this person was that was driving this vehicle was involved in this short-term rental. What, you know, again, it's a traffic issue, I get it. But if the house wasn't being rented, that vehicle wouldn't have been going up the street, I guess, you know. So again, people will associate a lot of other things that might not be specific to a short-term rental, but it kind of gets related to it, right? So that's why why does anybody have rules relative to short-term rentals? There's a, you know, we know why Linfield said no short-term rentals, because someone got killed at one of these facilities. So the idea at what our job, my perspective of what we want to do now is to think of any possible bad outcome and figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen. That's where these regulations should be aimed at. Don't want to overly regulate the good people, but some regulation has to be there so that you have something to fall back on when something that's not a good thing happens. And so if we just only sit here and say, well, let's think of what the issues are and make a rule, well, that's good. But what if there's something we didn't think of? And that's the rule, you know, is going to come back and bite us. The one that we didn't make is the one that's going to bite us, not the ones we do make. So I'd rather overregulate, at least on paper, so that you have, you know what I mean? So you have it in front of you ahead of time. Am I?
Yeah, no,
saying that
agree
correct?
with that.
That's what I'm headed.
And one thing I'd point out of Airbnb, I know of Airbnb, I know of long-term rentals, I know of all that. You know, you could have a serial killer rent on Airbnb. You could have a great person rent on Airbnb. I would think we'd focus more on what does Airbnb promote. You know, I don't think Airbnb says, hey, rent this place and do 100 down the street. It's part of your rental. You know, as you said, it was a traffic violation and something the police handle. You could get an Airbnb guest that steals from a local store. You could get one that's great. One thing to consider with, and I keep saying Airbnb, you know, obviously we're here to address overall short-term rentals, not just that platform. But one thing with Airbnb or VRBO that you're going to get as a landlord, there's no lease. They are considered guests at that property. As considered guests, they have rules and regulations they have to go by. If they violate any of them, their stay is over immediately. If they rent the place for 2 people and they have 4 people there, they are immediately can be thrown off the property by the host. If you rent long term to somebody, you don't have that privy. You're not gonna you're in housing court if someone throws a party and you don't want it there. So I think it boils down a lot more to the host. I did read a lot of stuff that said, hosts within the town, an emergency contact within the town, something. So it's not, as we've all stated now, just a commercial application that's running rampant. But there's a lot more protection for the host, putting their house on there than, let's just say, long term.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from, but again, I'm gonna go back to this complaint I had yesterday. This particular residence is clearly not hosted. Might be hosted on paper, but it's not being hosted in person. So if something was going on in this particular house, Airbnb is not going to know anything about it, right? The host doesn't know, so Airbnb doesn't know. The only thing a neighbor can do now is call the police, right?
That's right.
Right.
And then maybe call the town, and if the town has a process where all Airbnb short-term rentals have to have a property manager contact information, that after an incident, police handles that, and then either police or somebody else contacts the host and provides information on that particular situation, right? So, in this particular case, when somebody gets lost or drives fast and ends up in somebody else's driveway, it sounded like that happened. One suggestion I've read in other town is that hosts actually put up a sign that a particular property's short-term rental, so people don't get lost when they're looking for the property at night or, during bad weather conditions. The other way, for speeding happens in Nahant all the time. So by residents, non-residents, guests, visitors. I just feel that maybe, having a police respond and then having contact with the town that the town can follow up with would be the best way to handle it.
I don't disagree with you. Well, but the whole point of this, even developing this set of regulations, is to anticipate issues that may happen. I'm not saying they're going to happen, but they may happen, right? We have a whole, millions of laws in the books for stuff that might happen. We didn't wait until after somebody did something to say, oh, wait a minute, we should make that illegal, right? The laws were there first, well, for the most part. So what I'm saying is that's the basis of this document that we're attempting to produce, is to anticipate issues, and then we like to head them off, obviously being the best thing that we could be doing, but also to, I notice in a lot of stuff I've been looking at that there's violations, and then there's consequences for violations depending on the number of violations. So in other words, if a host is gets noise complaints on a weekly basis, then maybe that license gets lifted for a while. And that's where where we need to put some energy into figuring out all the different things that could go wrong, find out what to do about them if and when that happens.
Yeah, I agree with that, Wayne, for sure. We don't want to create any situation for the town or for the neighboring houses of this. I firmly believe it's, again, strictly to the host. If you're getting a host that's I don't even know how you could possibly promote it, but if you're getting a host that allows it, then yeah, they should be absolutely dealt with. My only discrepancy would be if we make rules for short-term rentals that say, hey, if you have a guest that's speeding down the street or you get a noise complaint, you know, we could strip your license. But we couldn't do that for someone long-term. You know, so these problems are only going to address short-term renters and almost put them differently. And my only fear would be if we develop a set of rules that says if you get 3 noise complaints, we're going to pull your license. It's great to assume that all people are nice and kind and, you know, understanding, but you could have a neighbor that just arbitrarily calls and says, hey, there was a lot of noise next door last night, and they do that 3 days in a row. You know,
Well, all this stuff is subject to hearing and whatever. I'm just saying, I'm not saying it should, it's not, none of this stuff is going to be etched in stone. But again, that's what we have to figure out. This is the whole point of having these meetings, is we have to figure out what set of rules and regulations is the best that we can put forth that protects the city, the town of Nahant from being overrun by, you know, short-term rentals.
a couple of things, and
I don't think I'm alone in that feeling.
No, absolutely. And a couple of things I probably, in missing our previous meeting, when I was given the opportunity at the beginning, a couple of rules for me that I think would be important would be on Airbnb, you can rent, let's say someone has a 2-family, you can rent 1 unit out, you can rent part of your house out. If you have a 2-family, you could also rent out individual bedrooms. You could rent out 1 bedroom to one couple, a 2nd bedroom to a 2nd couple, and they both share a bathroom and a kitchen. Again, I'm here preaching equality and you know, understanding of all situations, but that might be a little tough, you know, because now people could get more creative with, you know, how many technical bedrooms they have. And I know we're going to have an inspection process, but, you know, maybe it's 1 unit, 1 portion of a house, whatever we're going to decide upon is allowable per 1 set of guests, and that's it. A second thing is the bedroom counts. You could rent a 2-bedroom house and someone could say, hey, I have 12 people coming in, and if you say okay, I think they could rent it. I know I did, you know, browse through, and you do have to put a bedroom count on there, but I think if somebody asked, hey, could I have 10 people instead of the 4 that you allow, you know, I'll pay extra, someone potentially could say yes. So I think we should, one of our rules that we come up with should be what's there, you know, how many units are there, and does that jive with what the house is? You know, if someone has 12 bedrooms in a 1,200 square foot house, you know, they might be squeezing too much, and I'm sure it's not going to meet building code for everything you need anyhow. But, you know, taking balance to the size of the house, the off-street parking, that's another huge thing.
Well, that's going to be an issue, because we've got several neighborhoods that there isn't much parking to begin with. So if you've got a, you know, 10 or 12 people renting a house, they're not all coming in 1 vehicle, right? So you're going to end up with vehicles all over the place.
Exactly. And, you know, you don't want to tell somebody, you know, the first meeting we had, I think 5 of the people speaking were all hosts, and, you know, they emphasized how this really helps them hold on to their house and pay their mortgage. That's, you know, they're residents. They're entitled to that. But yeah, of course, we'd have to say, look, you know, we can't, you can't fill up the side street with cars. You know, it has to jive with what you have for parking. You know, they pretty much, I think everybody should have a plan in place for how many people can stay there, where are they parking, you know, and who's your emergency contact, how's this place managed, and so on and so forth.
Hi, this is Tony. Can I just make a couple comments based on what I've heard so far?
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Thank you. One, I think that, you know, one of the reasons why the town of Nahant is attractive for, you know, property investors that are looking to use properties for Airbnbs currently is because we have zero regulations and zero local licensing. So I think, you know, just by requiring a local licensing process and having any regulations are going to automatically, you know, give a potential investor more to think about when they're dependent on that license. So if you know, they're going to think twice about buying that property to use for Airbnb because they don't know if they're going to be able to get a local license or not. And secondly, they're going to be very cautious about who they rent to because they can't run the risk of potentially losing that license and going upside down on their investment. So just the fact that you're putting stuff in together and putting a local process, I think is going to protect the town from being, you know, overrun. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then the other comment I wanted to make was, you know, I think you got to be careful about the rules and regs you're thinking about and how you're putting, you know, what position you're putting the town in. So, you know, a noise rule can't be specific to short-term rentals.
Oh, no,
You know,
absolutely.
that would, you know, that would be something that if people in town don't want noise at night, then they should be coming to town meeting proposing a noise ordinance. You know, it puts the town in a tough spot to say, you know, you are being held to a different standard because you're not a resident. That's tough. So when you hear about the complaints that people have about Airbnbs, you almost have to categorize them into, is this an action that is specific to an Airbnb person, or could anybody, you know, be violating this rule? And speed is one of them. Certainly parking is something that, you know, I've rented Airbnbs in other states and cities, and they've said, we only have 4 spots and there's 0 off-street, on-street parking. So you can only bring 4 cars. It's strictly enforced. You know, I've had to abide by that rule. So I think off-street parking is certainly one of those categories that falls within your realm. And then just lastly, I was going to say, you know, the nuisance related issues that you're trying to create regulations for, you know, maybe you're having good conversation about it, but maybe you should start with like the less controversial stuff and tick those off. Like you had talked about in the first meeting regarding, you know, safety of the structure and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Thank
no,
you. That was I'm happy to answer any question. I just wanted to try and contribute and help, you know, keep you guys, you know, if in any way possible.
All right. Thank you, Tony.
I just, can I speak to what Tony just said? I think the issue with, say, for example, respect to noise, that we're looking at that as far as being a cause for suspending someone's existing license. I think that it would be possibly putting the town in a difficult spot, because if we suspend, if a person's license is suspended and they decide that they want to appeal it, we're going to have something in town as far as appealing it. I could see this potentially even going to a court if something like this got going. And I'm just using noise as an example. As far as enforcing the behavior at in and around a given location that's a B&B, I think we're walking very delicately there as far as what's enforceable. Certainly lots of things that we have for concerns, but being able to enforce it's going to be a tough one. From a study that I read written for Boston a few years ago, enforcement is the primary issue. That it's the one thing that everybody, cities across the country are having problems with is enforcement.
Well, and you know that that's an issue because again, we have police bylaws, we have zoning bylaws, and now we're going to create, in theory here, a whole different set of regulations. Enforcement is always going to be the problem. We have dog issues in town that seem to go unaddressed on a regular basis. It always becomes a matter of enforcement. But again, we have to at least start somewhere. And this, I think, unfortunately, this is where we need to start. What does this committee deem to be a reasonable approach to putting some regulation on the short-term rental situation?
Well, let's go with what Tony said about just setting up the licensing process and getting that piece in place. At the same time, would we agree that if anybody is going to be doing this has to be a Nahant resident? I mean, living here full time, would that be something that we could talk about?
I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure if that would be a legitimate. Can we do that? I guess would be the next question. Can we do that? Can we say that you have to live on the property? That's what Boston did.
Or at least live in the town.
Boston said it's owner occupied structures only. That's it. That was the rule. That's what they made.
Start.
I mean, so I could, I think that it's just a comment on that is, I don't know if that's going to solve the issues you're raising. I can just say from experience.
It's one of the methods.
I could just say from experience that sometimes it's harder to enforce the rules on residents, to be honest.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I don't think it's fair to say that, I don't think it's fair to assume that residents are going to solve the problem. I don't, sometimes it's harder to enforce rules with residents, to be honest. And, I don't think it's fair to assume one way or the other based on residency, whether you're going to be a good host or not. I think if you're trying to solve, I think you put the rules in place that require people to be, good hosts. It shouldn't really matter where they're from. I think people who, don't live in town are going to be very cautious about, making sure that they don't lose their local licensing. I don't think it's an automatic that they're going to be more likely to ignore the issues. And then the other thing on enforcement, I was just going to say that, like, for the most part, the couple, couple larger issues, most of the complaints that we get are, nuisance issues that anybody in town could be doing. Speeding, parking, loud noise, but the big issues like parties, functions, when we've had to take that stuff on and speak to the owners or the hosts, they've been very receptive to it. So in a larger city like Boston, I'm sure enforcement's very, very hard. And for us, it'll be difficult because of lack of personnel. But in a small town, I think people are very responsive to, their neighbors. And when the town reaches out and says, this is the second or third complaint we received about guests renting from your property, and we're going to, we need to have a discussion about whether we're going to suspend or revoke your license. I think they're going to take that very seriously.
We would like to assume.
I think that.
Well, that's the experience I've had so far.
Yeah.
That's the experience I've had so far.
I think that a resident's only requirement would at least increase the odds that the owner of the property is going to be available if there's an issue. And it would also certainly compromise speculation on properties, which is increasing property values for people buying these from who live elsewhere, and they're buying them just so that they can rent them on one of these short-term rental platforms. And in that case, not only do you have the increased potential for higher property values, but you're also removing some of these properties from being available for just a long-term rental potentially. I just don't see the disadvantage in limiting this to a residence only.
Well, then that's, again, this will be a topic of discussion, I'm sure, not just
I
tonight.
agree with the second. I agree with the latter, the comment there, but I'm just saying, don't assume that resident hosts are going to perform one way compared to non-resident hosts. I don't think it's a fair way to assume, the situation. I think you're better off creating rules that say, these are the parking restrictions. These are the code restrictions in the house. If you are, you need to get a license, X amount of complaints are going to put you in front of the town to potentially review, like whether you are allowed to continue to have a license or not. That in and of itself is going to make someone be careful about protecting their investment if they're doing this as an investment,
especially a resident.
Well,
I don't think that's a fair assumption, to be honest.
That.
And the other thing is, I don't think we should be. I also don't think that having a resident to, you shouldn't be getting into the business of calling the resident the night of an incident to deal with a problem. That should not be what. I don't think that's what we should be trying to accomplish. We have, if they are breaking a town law or causing a nuisance, or there's an issue, with the neighbors of the people who are renting, they should be calling the police department. And then it's that call to the police department and the police department dealing with that issue and their report that should be considered as, whether or not the host should be allowed to host in the future or temporarily suspended or whatever it might, assessed a fine, whatever that might be. But we shouldn't be getting into the business of, needing to have a resident enforce a town bylaw on their guest. That's not a good. I don't think that's going to result in a positive experience.
Okay. All right. So let's keep. We're not making our way down this list very quickly. So let's move down the list a little bit. Rob, it's a good question. So I'm looking at a line here that says, "What is a short-term rental?" Is that pretty much where we left off?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we left off.
Okay, so and then I think this is a good point. I think we need well, on this list, I'm looking at 4 different situations, or at least 3 anyway, right? So let's determine what situation is what, right?
Yep.
I'm sorry, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm a little late. It just took me a bit to find my unmute button. But I disagree with the last gentleman. I think if somebody wants to rent their home, then they should be absolutely responsible for their guests' behavior before it goes to the police. And I think that if the host lives on the property, it would definitely help any sort of situation like that, without a doubt.
Excuse me, could you identify yourself?
Sure. My name is Al Tassel. I live on Desmond Drive.
Thank you. We just want to make sure that's part of the record.
Sure.
I'm not going to agree or disagree. I think you're making a good point. But again, that's why we have a committee, because we're going to get a lot of different opinions on it.
Thank you.
All right, so let's look at this short-term rental definition. The definition of it in itself on line 6 is certainly self-explanatory, but then they've got these different types of shares in limited share, home share, and owner adjacent. Do all these apply in our situation? Possibly, right? So we've got a limited share unit that says the limited share shall have a private bedroom or shared space in an owner operator's primary residence. The owner would be present. The fee, and then it gives a fee, right? So certainly that's a situation that we probably already have. We certainly will have. We have a homeowner that's renting a bedroom or two, right? So my personal opinion on this would be that somewhere along the line we need to regulate how many bedrooms are we going to allow someone to rent. Because if you're renting it out per bedroom, that you're assuming that the people in the other a different bedroom are not related or not with that group, right? That's what I'm thinking. So
All right. Wayne,
committee
is there
feel
a
about-
building department regulation that regulates how many people can occupy a bedroom?
a bedroom per se?
Right. So if you have a legal bedroom, is there
No,
a
that's
requirement,
actually,
like, can you have 2 people, 4 people?
that's
It's based
actually
on square footage.
Oh,
not
okay.
a building regulation, it's health regulation.
Okay.
But we also have a bylaw that says you can only have 2 boarders in your house, right? So we have a conflict on all of this that conflicts with one of our existing bylaws.
That's correct.
And we
Right?
should,
We
we
have a
should also,
bylaw
we
only
should
have
also
2
point
board-
out that that bylaw is what is currently being pointed to as far as allowing short-term rentals as it is right now.
Well, again, and hence the confusion, right?
Yeah, so what do people think about limiting the number of bedrooms for owner occupied property?
I'd love to hear some other opinions on this. I know that there are not a lot of big houses in that, but there definitely are a few. So if I own a house that has 7 or 8 bedrooms, can I rent out all those 7 or 8 bedrooms to 7 or 8 individual, renters? That now I'm running a hotel, right?
Right, I think that's what we tried to talk to last time we've met with Rob. Maybe the best way to handle it would be that you rent it to one family. So let's say you have parents and 2 kids, right? If you have 2 bedrooms, they could potentially rent it, but it would be one party if you actually live in the residence, so that you're not creating de facto boarding house.
I understand where that would be probably a good rule. Is there, what's the rest of the read in the committee here?
I would agree with that. That's touching on what I said from the beginning. A legal unit, a standalone unit can host one set of guests. It cannot be subdivided up. Wayne, just like someone couldn't take a single family and make it into a 5-unit building by putting a kitchenette in each bedroom and a lock on the door. I would think one unit would get one set of guests, and each bedroom, perhaps we'd have to get some chime back from John, but perhaps a bedroom can host 2 people, or is there consideration if there's a couple with a small child or something? I would think that's the sticking point, but that in and itself was one of the things that I read in some towns. Airbnb did originate from, I forget, it might have been one of the Olympics, but someone came up with the idea, hey, I'll just rent out a cot in my living room, and they ended up renting out multiple cots in their living room, and people just stayed there because the local hotels were all filled up. And before you know it, you were, running some sort of shelter almost. I don't think we should, personally, I don't think we should entertain that. But I'm not sure if that's a problem now. But as you said, Wayne, we're here to address problems, hopefully before they arise. So, yeah,
Alright.
I would say one guest per legal dwelling or unit.
All right, well, let's go down these definitions because there are different situations here, right? So we just went through the limited share one, right? Oh, did I read that whole thing out?
Well, I don't think you got into the price, but that's okay.
Oh, I don't, no, I know I didn't read the price part, but part of that definition of limited share is in this particular one is occupancy is limited to 3 guest bedrooms or 6 guests. And in this definition, and this is still the one from Cambridge we're looking at, right, Rob?
This is Boston.
This is Boston. Okay, so whatever, but it's at least places some limit on it, right? I mean, we could just as easily place a 2-bedroom limit on that if we thought that was the thing to do.
Yep.
Right? So now in the home share, right? Now the home is the whole unit. You're renting out the whole house, right? So and I can understand that how do you regulate that? Well, I'm going to say that if I wanted to rent my house out, I don't think anyone should tell me that I can or can't, right? But I'm renting the whole house and I'm not going to be here. And then they have, in this particular definition, there's a limit of 5 bedrooms. Again, I think in that situation, it's limited to whatever legitimate bedrooms the house may or may not have. I mean, if someone happens to have an 8-bedroom house and they're renting the whole house, then that's what it is.
Is that to one family or is that multiple?
It doesn't matter at that point. You're
Okay.
renting out the whole house, right? So
And to backstep, but to touch on that a little bit, how we could address that, because I constantly think what we've all kind of brought up so far, how are we going to enforce this? And enforcement is certainly going to be an issue regardless of what regulations we have. But I feel like the simpler we make the enforcement, the more likely we are to succeed. Somebody gets a license for a house, they get one license. Therefore, they should only have one listing up on Airbnb.
absolutely.
Airbnb, you go on there and, if you want to book the 4th of July at Wayne Wilson's house, but someone else booked it, there's only one unit. So if it's booked, it's already gone. There's no way to go in there and say, oh, wait, but if it's just 2 people, you can take this bedroom over here. But we could easily go online and say, hey, Mr. Smith, you have one house. Why do you have 2 listings under that one address? I think that would be pretty easily enforceable.
I agree, Steve. But again, so that's why we want to go through these definitions. So now let's walk down to the last one, owner adjacent. All right. So now we're in this particular definition. It's an owner occupied 2 or 3 family dwelling, right? And it says the owner lists a single secondary unit as a short-term rental, and there's a certain fee for that. All right. So let's go to any multi-family building in town. I think my personal opinion would be that someone has 3 units and they could rent each of those 3 units out, each of them again being a separate rental, but not divvying it up into separate bedrooms like we just discussed on the home share one. You can rent the whole unit, but you can't rent out individual bedrooms within that unit. Does that sound like a full thing to do with something like that?
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with it more. I mean, I think it's very reasonable.
All right, so let's keep moving down the list. And that, I'm not sure what we got here. Limit the legalization of short-term rentals to primary residents. All right, so that's kind of like what we were just talking about, right? Resident only type of thing.
Yeah, this is actually a recommendation from a publication called The Growth of Commercial Short-Term Rentals, How Boston Can Protect Affordable Housing and Quality of Life. It's a study done in 2017, and this is one of the recommendations.
Do we know who funded the study?
I believe Boston did. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Do you have the actual study that you could maybe distribute to the members? That would be interesting to read.
Yeah, I'll send that around.
All right, so, but it would appears to me, I'm reading through this quickly, they want to limit this whole situation to owner occupied dwellings. Is that the gist of what everyone else is reading?
Right. So that was an issue in Boston and a few other big cities like New York City, for example, because they have, you know, some investor property owners who would buy, you know, investment properties and rent them out, and then people didn't have enough apartments to rent as long-term residents. I'm not sure that's an issue in Nahant. That's why, you know, using these big cities is interesting, but may not be Nahant's problem.
I agree with that.
Okay, so again, further discussion on that general category. And then this next paragraph on line 17 is accountability for disruptive guest behavior. We kind of just already had that conversation. I mean, unfortunately, it's more of a police issue, but I think repetitive disruption of the neighborhood in a particular, you know, a particular host situation, I think certainly there has to be consequence for that. So if we did have an irresponsible host that's, you know, constantly either renting to too many people or just, you know, there's always something going on there and it's always an issue, then it's clearly there has to be some price to pay for that. So there's got to be somewhere in all this stuff that we're going to try to do, we have to establish some kind of a consequences for not following the rules. I don't think that's unreasonable.
No, and Wayne, one thing that I read that I found interesting, some towns would give some literature to the host and say, we would like this, you know, in your rules and regulations that are on your host page, you know, VRBO, Airbnb, whatever it may be. And that could stipulate, you know, the noise ordinance in town. That could stipulate how many guests. That could stipulate the parking. That way, because you might get a host that, you know, isn't all that well versed at being a landlord, and you know, perhaps they don't want unruly guests, but they are somehow just seem like they're promoting to them. So perhaps if we come up with something that should be in their write-up saying that, you know, do X, Y, and Z, it might help them succeed. It might alleviate a lot of the town's issues, or neighborly issues, should I say, and just get these people off on the right foot. And more so, it will tell the host that, hey, this is what we expect from you. This is what you should expect from your guests. And if your guests don't do this and you don't address it, then we are going to.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah, it's actually a good idea. You could almost create like minimum rules for short-term rentals that the town would like to initiate, right? And then any other rules the host adds on is per the host requirement. I like that idea.
Okay. And Rob, do you want to jump in on this a little bit?
I'm mostly listening and writing right now, Wayne. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Don't write too much. It's being recorded. But Well, again, I mean, this paragraph that we're reading here is pretty much just establishing that there needs to be some enforcement measures in taken into account. I think that's what any reasonable person would expect, that's certainly, it's needed. Because as nice a people as we like to think all our neighbors are, sometimes you need to be able to point out a rule to someone and say, no, you can't do that. I'm not sure where we are, and I can't see all of Rob's thing here, so I'm not sure where we are on his.
That was the last of it as far as what I had on this document, Wayne.
Okay, that's great. Well, then let's pause for a moment, and I want to invite our non-committee members that might be looking to jump in with a comment or a question. And I can't, of course, I think.
Wayne,
Rob,
there are a couple of questions in the chat that I was monitoring, so
Okay.
maybe I can take one of those. There was a question on how are these guests vetted? So I'm a host, so I can tell you that as a host, you have a couple of options to vet your guests. If you were to look at my rules that people have to agree to before they book, you would know that I'm pretty serious about no nonsense. So, you establish rules, then you have an option to accept guests with positive reviews from other hosts. You also have an option to ask guests to provide names of all the parties, right? So I ask people before they book to provide me their full names so I can do some basic research on who they are and what they're about. I ask them to give me the purpose of their stay. So, so people are required to do a little bit of work on their end before they can book with me. So that's, as a host, obviously you want to make sure that these people are staying in your home. You want to accept good quality guests. You don't want, people that are going to be disruptive or cause problems. And that's, how I vet guests, and other hosts have the option to accept people who, provide more information on themselves, that use verified ID through Airbnb, and then have positive feedback. Sometimes, you accept guests with no feedback if, you make a determination before booking that they're intelligent and responsible and reasonable people.
Thank you, Maria. Does anyone else? You said you had something in chat. Excuse me.
There were a couple comments in chat, so let me see if I can read these off. Somebody had a concern that the charm of Nahant, knowing your neighbors, could be impacted by having short-term rentals. There was a comment that Nahant police may have the noise complaints basically tied to the rental properties, which is true. So if people call the police, I think they should have record of noise complaints.
Oh yeah, well that always stays. Those records never go away.
Right. Yeah. So we could, we could actually check with the police department and see what kind of complaints they're getting from homeowners. And then there was a comment whether non-owner occupied property is considered commercial property and should be regulated as such. There was a question whether we have a noise ordinance in Nahant. What else? How many homes are currently listed as short-term rentals? So that number is 17. And I think, should we limit the number of licenses and, how many licenses? And then there's another comment that Nahant shouldn't be a business. So I don't know if anybody else has any comments that they would like to ask, or questions, suggestions, feedback.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Susan Casivio. I live at 65 Mayolas Road.
Go ahead, Sue.
And am trying to, we have a situation that we're living with where the house next door to us is, people came in, bought it, and it's now on Airbnb, and looks like it's booked up for the whole summer. So I'm trying to ascertain if we're going to be regulating non-owner occupied, whether it's resident of the town or not. I don't know that that matters, but if, like Boston did, where they're having, no non-owner occupied rentals are allowed. So I just don't know if we're creating a third category or a fourth category that wouldn't have been listed on the list that you just went through.
Okay, so that's one of the conversations we were just having a short while ago is, is it reasonable to restrict all of this activity to a resident owned, or not necessarily owner occupied, but
Well,
own-
definitely, I think owner occupied. I think whether it's resident or not, it's.
well,
I
if it's
think
owner, it's automatically a resident, right?
right. It would automatically be a resident, but I mean, someone had mentioned before that if it's non-owner occupied and it's just a rental, then is it a commercial property?
Well, no, that's not necessarily true, right? I mean, any one of us could own several different houses in town and have them all rented out, long-term rental. There's nothing to stop us from doing that.
It's actually how they're being rented that's the issue, though. It's
Right. I mean,
things that are going
owners
through the.
Well, again, that's what I'm saying. I'm sure we're going to have a back and forth here now on is it appropriate to limit short-term rentals to structures that are owned by town residents, as opposed to someone obviously not necessarily owner occupied, but a resident of the town. I'm not even sure if that's would even be legally enforceable. But again, that's,
I mean, I don't
part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care if it's a resident or not. I care whether it's an owner occupied or not. And then the only other comment that I had is, we do have a rental at our house in Florida, that's in a very restricted program. And the way they restrict the number of people is they actually do the bed count. And you can't have any more heads than you have beds. So, and if you do that, you're in violation and you could lose your license.
Yeah, again, another reasonable way to possibly, do some regulation here. That's what we're trying to do. Unfortunately, we're in the process now. We've got a lot of rules from a lot of different cities and towns that we've been reviewing. Some of them seem a little overkill. Some of them seem like they're, maybe not enforcing enough, but we know that right now we have no rules. So it's the wild, wild west here now as far as all the situation is. So I think we need to develop at the minimum, some short list of the must-have regulations, and then this is a process that might be altered on an annual basis. This is not etched in stone once we do this. Everything's going to be subject to an amendment or an addition or a deletion. So, but we're just trying to find a reasonable place to start the process. And it's going to take some doing to make it right and adapt it to the town, to the town of Nahant, as opposed to the city of Boston and the city of Cambridge.
Hey, Wayne, this is Tony again.
Yeah.
I didn't catch the name of the last person that was speaking there. For folks who are, pro owner occupied or pro resident, I would like to ask them, what issues do they think that owner occupied or resident owner solves what issues with those renters does that solve? Because you're going to still need to know that and include that in your rules. You know, because there's just because it's owner occupied or resident owned, you know, those folks could be out of town or not available for some reason or the other, you know, while somebody's renting.
Absolutely.
So you're still going to want to have an understanding of what are the issues that people are concerned about, you know, and the woman that just spoke said that,
Yeah, that was
lives
me,
right next
Susan.
door.
Susan
Hi, Susan.
Casevio,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, so maybe you could expand a little bit on your comment.
Yeah, Susan, do you want to elaborate on, you know, what are the, well, what have you had, what issues have you had to this point?
I think Susan said that it hasn't been rented yet. It was just purchased, so.
Well, I think that property was purchased about a year ago.
Can I say something? I'd like
Yeah.
to add something. This is Al Tassel again.
Great. Al, go ahead.
I think that and you brought this up, Wayne, I agree with you. We have to look at each city and town and see what the intent would be, or the type of individual, or why they would be renting a certain unit. You know, perhaps if it's in a city, you could have, you know, people there on short-term work programs, etc. I think we all know in Nahant, for 4 or 5 months of the year, many of these rentals are here to enjoy themselves, enjoy the beach. You know, what better place to spend, you know, a week or two? But I think it's going to be 100% leisure. Now, I'm not going to say that every rental is going to turn into an animal house routine, but for those of us, and I'm sure there's many of us on this call, we bought our homes long before we'd ever heard of the term Airbnb. And, you know, we've got, right? I mean, we've got children in our neighborhoods playing, and the last thing that you want, and I don't happen to have small children, but if I had small children, I don't think I'd want a few of my neighbors having, you know, a whole bunch of people in and out all day on their way back and forth to the beach and having fun at night. And I think that's what the concern is. And the other part that I will reiterate is, if I were to rent out a section of my home, or if I had an in-law apartment, which I don't, but if I did, I know that as an owner occupant, if I'm living there, if I were to rent that out, I would ensure the conduct of who I rented it to would be on par, not to upset my neighbors.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that.
I think your mere presence would help make sure that did happen.
Agreed.
I think it may or may not. I think that's up to the individual. We're all different. We're all, you know, our level of expectations and what we think is acceptable can greatly differ. I think it's more to the rules, and
It's a good point. And again, that's why we're having these meetings, so we can take all these differing opinions and try to turn them into some kind of a document that makes sense to everybody.
Wayne, this is Tony. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. I just want to, speak to what Al was just saying there. And I completely understand his comment and concern and, the example he provided. I also understand his point by, that a owner occupied is there and more likely to ensure that, noise and parties and things of that nature aren't occurring. It's not 100% the case, but it is more likely. I just want to say, work as a town official, and Wayne and John can definitely
elaborate on this, and even Rob, you know, in your role as harbor master, you know, it's concerns about, you know, people coming and going and making like assumptions about what types of people do that. It's very hard for us. It's very hard to develop a rule and for the town to enforce a rule that isn't based on solid ground. So while I completely understand the concern and the comment, and I don't think Al's the only one that feels that way. I think there are a lot of people in town that are concerned about that. But, you know, the role of the committee, creating a legitimate rule for the town to enforce, you have to be more specific. You have to be more clear, and it has to be more black and white. It can't be based, you know, it can't be gray. It can't be based on assumption. It can't be inequitable. It needs to be, you know, a fair regulation. So while I understand the concern, you know, short-term rentals happen to be just that, people coming and going on a, you know, weekend basis. You know, it's hard for us to come up with a rule. That's just, you know, that you know, it's almost like you're just opposing it altogether. That's a different discussion. If we're talking about, you know, what are the things that you know, we want to make sure that are written in the rules that hosts will be held accountable for enforcing that their guests are doing. You have to be a little bit more specific. So that's why I asked when Susan mentioned, you know, living next door to a property, you know, elaborate, go beyond just general concern about Airbnb based off like an assumption that it's going to bring bad people or loud noise. You know, what are the specific things that you're concerned about that this committee could potentially incorporate into the rule?
Right.
And I think
Hi,
you guys, the committee members,
this-
need to be asked those questions.
Yeah, this is Susan. I just, my issue is whether we're going to be regulating owner occupied separately from non-owner occupied.
I don't think that's been determined at this point.
Both are on the table.
Right, okay.
Yeah, this is Steve. I would think the rules would assimilate from one to the other. And Susan, personally, I feel like the biggest concern with anybody with Airbnb is just the uncertainty. It's the fact that you could have a different person next to you every night of the week.
Well, property value is a big issue. We just did a big renovation on our house, and now the house next door is a rental. So the property value of my house is going to go down because I have a rental next to me.
I wouldn't say for sure. I can't predict the future. I don't, and I'm not here to comfort or oppose anyone. I don't know if you would see that. You may not. But my concern, I think that I hope the committee takes going forward and kind of elaborating more on what Tony just said. What are the specific concerns with specifically a short-term rental? If somebody purchased that house next to you and the day they bought it, they put a for rent sign out front, I don't know what would potentially be different. You know, it's not like
no, it's constantly different people coming and going. It's the fact that there isn't anyone there that is monitoring it. There is no owner that's overseeing the property. The owner lives outside of Nahant, and there was the second, I think it was the second rental they had. There was a huge party, cars up and down the street in the winter in the wintertime when there's not supposed to be parking.
Well,
on the street.
That's
And
what we're here
and
to
they
hopefully put an end to.
right, and they trashed the yard. They threw the trash all over the yard. There were animals everywhere digging through the trash. I mean, so that was just the second people that were there.
Right.
So
And
it-
that, so Susan, let me jump in for 1 second. So
Yeah.
again, because we have no rules, that stuff can happen.
Right.
If we can get a reasonable list of rules and regulations accepted by the town, then theoretically, then we would be, someone would be saying to that host, this can't happen, strike one, but
Right.
right now, we have nothing to hold over their head. They're not
exactly.
required. So regardless of whether that property was owned by someone who happens to live in town or someone that
It-
doesn't live in town,
Doesn't matter.
still be a problem. But because we have no rules, it's a problem that we can't deal with because we have no method to deal with it. But
Right.
certainly,
No,
if we can establish this reasonable set of rules, then we can, if worst case scenario, you strip someone of their license to do this and it'll be gone. It won't happen again, right?
right.
But but that's why, again, this is the kind of the whole point of being here. And that's
That's
why
great.
we want to hear from people like you, because we want to understand all the different situations that people have been put in to this point. I mean, it's still relatively new to a lot of people, I know,
Yep.
I'm sure we've had Airbnb hosts in Nahant for what, 10, 12 years now, probably. I mean, it's been around for a while. It didn't just happen like yesterday. So we do have some history of short-term rentals in town. I'm not only going to go by what I hear in my own office. I get the occasional complaint, like I did yesterday, about a guy that was speeding up the street and ended up at the short-term rental. That's where he found the car. But I haven't really had a lot of complaints, and I'm just kind of assuming that my office is going to get them. So if I haven't had a lot of complaints in my office, I'm assuming there aren't that many out there. But again, maybe they're just not calling my office.
Right.
I'm sure that the police department is the place that the complaint, that like what you just described, cars in the street, blah, blah, blah. That's definitely a police issue, because obviously they weren't supposed to be in the street overnight in the wintertime.
Right.
And they should have known that before they rented it, that they couldn't put vehicles on the street in the wintertime.
Right.
Again, that's one of those things, like Maria was explaining, that she establishes a criteria for her guests, and so that all these guests have to understand what is expected of them.
Right. But most importantly, she's there to enforce
She
her
happens
own
to,
rules.
but but she doesn't have to stay home. She's not required to be home just because she rented out a room in her house, right? So even if she's not home, but she's already vetted these people to a certain extent to make sure she understands that these people that she's allowing into her home are not going to tear the place apart.
Right.
And we like to think that most hosts, the vast majority of hosts, don't want this disruptive behavior in there, because it's there. Now someone had to go clean up after these people. It's coming out of their pocket somewhere along the line.
Right.
That's right. This is really helpful feedback. I think that's what we kind of, are also looking for, getting feedback from neighbors of those Airbnb properties. And, if you've seen issues, what is your experience? So aside from this party, have you had any other negative experiences to date?
No, it's only been rented 3 times. It was vacant for the entire month of February, and they had 1 rental last weekend, and everything was quiet. So,
All right, so it's not all bad so far.
One thing I think we could touch on, just off of what Sue just said, thinking potentially if there's outdoor space. But again, I walk a delicate line that I wouldn't want to discriminate against. I wouldn't want to say if you have an Airbnb guest, they can't be outside past 9 o'clock, but the people on the other side of your house that rent month to month are out there till 11 without a problem. But potentially we could lean on the host a little bit to say, hey, if you're offering outdoor space, you know, this you're well aware it's probably going to be sensitive to the surrounding houses. Perhaps limit the time that you allow them out there. And Sue, again, what you said, you know, I would think that in the rules, only the guests that are staying at the house, which are an allotted number of guests, that is determined based upon bedroom counts and parking spaces, and of course the Board of Health and the building commissioner. You know, nobody else can be at that property, because I'm on the planning board. I think most of the members on this board or this committee are aware. We had an instance, there was, we read it aloud at a planning board meeting. There was an Airbnb host, and I believe they were hosting weddings at the house, which I went on Airbnb and I searched high and low, and I didn't find anywhere that you could actually allocate, like, hey, have a wedding here. But somehow this individual was having that circumstance. And one cool thing to touch on what Tony said, he kind of leaned back on us and he said, hey, listen, I would love, you know, for the town to give me some rules to put in here, you know, to kind of tell these people what they can and can't do. And, you know, maybe we helped him out. It might sound elementary to most of us that, you know, how is somebody allowing weddings at their property? And I believe that was an owner-occupied one. But, you know, that's, I think, what this committee is going to do. This committee is going to put an umbrella over the people that should come first, you know, being the residents. And you might be a resident that has an Airbnb. You know, we're still going to look out for your best interest, but not hopefully allow that to ruin the lives of the surrounding neighborhood.
Right.
So,
great.
You know, one of the things you just mentioned, Steve, I appreciate your comment because it puts, as you mentioned, like it puts the town in a very awkward position to enforce rules when we're applying them differently to, you know, residents and non-residents. That's a very awkward thing for our police department, for our building inspector. You know, it's for our town. It's very awkward to be put in that position. So, for example, you know, we have a resident who, you know, calls the police department because there's somebody parked in front of their house without a sticker. You know, but then later that night they have guests over that have stickers and they don't want them tagged. That puts us in a very tough spot, you know, when people are tickets to the court and they're saying, you know, it's being enforced unfairly. So that's why I say, you know, when you are putting this license, this local license, and you're using that as the leverage piece on these owners to say, if you are not abiding by the town bylaws, when that could be parking restrictions or noise issues, you know, and you are getting consistent complaints, you're at risk of losing that license. And Susan, I'm sure that, you know, the person who bought the house next to you, you know, looked at that property, you know, and if they're looking at it as an investment opportunity, they're doing the math on what that mortgage is going to cost and how much they're going to have to rent it out for and for how much in order to turn a profit. And they can't risk losing their ability to rent.
Right.
Because they'll go upside down on that investment. So that's why I think, you know, that was my point earlier where, you know, using the fact that there isn't a local license right now, there's no question, there's no concern for an investor. They, you know, they know they're going to be able to come in and they're going to be able to rent. But if they don't, you know, if they see they got to get a local license and if those licenses are limited, they're capped on how many can be allowed in a year. You know, they're going to be very careful about making sure that they're, you know, renting to the right people.
Exactly.
So
Oh, that's great.
Okay, all right, so we're way past our allotted time. So just before I ask someone to make a motion to adjourn for the evening, do we have any other non-committee members that would like to jump in and offer up an opinion or a question? Rob, I'm not sure if I can see what you can see, so.
I think it's great. This is Debbie.
Oh, okay, Deb.
Hi, Wayne.
Hiya.
I think it's great you're looking into all of this, and I've been behind. I haven't been paying attention, but this was very good that you're looking into all these different things to how it will impact Nahant. So I appreciate that you haven't made any final decisions and you're looking into it so well. You combine a lot of different things. Thank you for your
Well,
efforts.
All right, so anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
All
I'll
right,
second
well,
that.
okay, let's vote on the motion. Let's go around again. Maria,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Rob,
Aye.
and I vote aye. All right, thank you, everyone. I think we had a great meeting. Let's, if anyone, and I don't want to walk the fine line between what's a meeting, what isn't a meeting, but Rob, if you could distribute any more information than you haven't already, I think that would be great. And oh, I know what we didn't do. Sorry. I know we were supposed to be on a regular schedule. Are we going to maintain that 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Right? There's no reason.
Works for me.
Second and fourth Tuesday.
Right? Everyone good with that? It's gonna work? Just to make sure before we actually adjourn?
Works for me.
Yep.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna declare the meeting adjourned at 7:41. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Gary.
Thank you.